Okay, thanks very much. We're now on the second part of the Equality Impact Assessment training for Aberdeen with the Joint Committee for the City Regional Deal. In this session, we're going to be talking about what's the legislation and what is it that's required of us as we go forward. So, just to go straight into this, the main piece of legislation that we'll be thinking about in this 30-minute section or segment of the training is the Equality Act 2010. The Equality Act has superseded and replaced the Sex Discrimination Act, Race Relations Act, and Disability Rights Act, but often you'll still see them referred to. It established the concept of protected characteristics. These are the groups of people in society who are protected by the Equality Act. We'll talk about that in a minute. It talks about the types of discrimination that can occur and the protection that you get. So particularly, we're going to be thinking about indirect and direct discrimination, a wee bit of an exercise on that. It deals with things like discriminatory advertising, discrimination by association, and sets out redress. The important thing to remember about this part of the legislation is that you have to have experienced discrimination before you can actually assert your rights. It doesn't do anything to prevent discrimination from happening, arguably, but it does give you rights should it occur to you. One of the things we know is that only a minority of people ever take actions under the Act, people who think they've experienced discrimination, because it can be difficult, cumbersome, expensive, and people sometimes just want to get on with their lives. But anyway, so we're going to have a think about this just now. So, protected characteristics. If anybody ever suggests to you that the Equality Act is about minorities, have a wee look at this list and have a wee think about it. And actually, this is about all of us, all the time. We all have an age, we all have a sex, we all have a race, we all have a religion or a belief or a lack of religion, which is in that sense a belief. So we are all protected by the legislation. We can all challenge discrimination, and discrimination affects all of us one way or another as we move from being children to teenagers to young adults to fully fledged workers, and then into older retired people. We can experience different forms of discrimination. As we've seen, men and women outcomes can be very different, particularly in terms of ethnicity or disability. We see quite sharp areas of difference that we simply cannot explain by societal choice or market forces or whatever it is. So some of these characteristics you'll come up against more often than not in terms of the work you'll be doing around equality impact assessment. In the government, we're recommending that you particularly focus on sex, on race and disability, and that you also think very strongly about deprivation. It's not a characteristic under the Equality Act in this context. We'll come on to it a little bit in a minute. Why are we asking you to concentrate on these ones? Well, these are the grounds that we have the most data for. It's what we can actually see the most difference of change in. And we believe that if you get it right for these groups, in terms of age, race, sex, disability, the chances are that you're going to be dealing with a lot of the other forms of discrimination that you might encounter just by good practice. Now, one of the things which I think is really important when you're going to look at equality impact assessment is understanding the impact of policy and practice on difference and exclusion. Now, under the Equality Act, we tend to label these things being direct and indirect discrimination, so it's useful to have a kind of idea of what these concepts are. Put very simply, direct discrimination is when you're treated worse than another person because you have a protected characteristic. I used to work as a caseworker on this, and one of the most common things which I saw, and this was in Edinburgh, was you have somebody who was sort of black Scot, somebody who's maybe come from Jamaica or Africa and have an accent. They see a flat which is advertised in the local paper for let. They call up and they're told, oh, really sorry, the flat's just gone. Then the white Scottish girlfriend calls up 15 minutes later and she's invited to view the flat. So a difference of treatment on the basis of a protected characteristic, in this case, race. Indirect discrimination is less about the kind of in-your-face discrimination of we don't want you because of this. It's about the way that policies or practices interact. So one of the really classic things of indirect discrimination was, and still is, around uniform policies. So there are still not so many now, but we still see some workforce at some industries or employers who say, well, you know, women need to wear skirts. We want to have a professional looking staff team. Guys wear skirts, guys wear suits, women wear skirts. Now, what that does is that if you're part of a religious group or a faith group where for decency reasons your religion prohibits you from having parts of your body visible, such as particularly Muslims and Sikhs, then you cannot become part of that workforce. Now we've seen this, we've seen a change over years, and it's been very heartening. It does very similar again with Sikhs. Oh, you can't wear that here. It's part of my religion, it's part of my faith. I need to do it because it's more important than work. So direct discrimination tends to be about the interaction of different people, often about discretion. Indirect discrimination is more about the way in which policies affect people without being deliberately aimed at them. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to sit back for about 5 minutes or so and let you have a look at the next slide. And I want you to have a think about this and be able to come back and say, well, which one of these is direct and which one of these is indirect? Is that okay? Everybody got that?
Yeah.
So I'll give you about 5-6 minutes from now. And I need to give you the slide, don't I? There we are. So I'll be quiet for the next 5 minutes and I'll come back and just run through the slides as we go on. Okay, thanks very much. So if we have a look at the slides now, so these are all real examples of discrimination that's occurred in the last 5 years, almost all of it in Scotland. I'll be able to give you the examples and references as we go forward. So Laurie, I believe you're looking at the first one, the landlord who refuses to let to coloured tenants because of the cooking smells which they apparently produce.
Of course, and just horrified that these are actually real examples, and in Scotland it's just, well, first one is the one I've concentrated on, but no, that's horrible to know that they're real examples. I would say that first one is an example of direction. They're directly basically discriminating against a particular group based on their ethnicity, and there's a really kind of harmful just stereotype in there as well. So I would say that was a direct example of discrimination.
Very much. This is the one which doesn't happen in Scotland. So this is Fergus Wilson, who was until very recently Kent's largest private landlord, and he refused to let to Asian people because he believed that the things that they cooked would damage his house. Now, I worked, my main jobs with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and we ended up taking an interdict, an injunction against him to prevent him from discriminating against ethnic minority people. He also discriminated against people from, he didn't like lone parents, and he wouldn't accept people on DSS. 2 or 3 cases which have just gone through very recently about discrimination against people on benefits and from landlords, which has again ruled that that's indirect discrimination against disabled people and against women, which has been really, really helpful as well. But yeah. So the second one, digital by default application process for leisure services. Who'd like to pick that up?
That would be myself. I would have to go with indirect. It's
seems to be a service maybe targeted towards a certain group run by the digital service. Whatever.
Yeah.
Seems to be, yeah.
Who do you think might be particularly affected by that?
It could be those who can't afford the IT equipment. It could be done by whatever service there is. So it could be discriminated based on the age, race, ethnic minority. It depends on how it's done, how it's laid out. It could be default by an Excel sheet on their personal information. So it could even be location.
Yeah, what we find, no, you're absolutely right, it is indirect discrimination. What we particularly find is that people from our most deprived communities have got lower levels of access to broadband, and also to the technology, the hardware to do this. Older people, about 1 in 4 older people are not, again, connected, and about 10% of disabled people. So now the really simple way around this is to have another way of doing it. So a telephone service. I've written the form, okay, a little bit more difficult just now in the middle of COVID, but this kind of one door only approach to services, whilst it suits the service provider really well, has unintended consequences, in this case for disabled people, for people on the lowest incomes, and for older people. So yeah, very clearly indirect discrimination. So, third one, women returning from maternity leave is downgraded.
I would say it's direct discrimination because it's affecting a particular individual, treated her worse because of her protected characteristic of being pregnant and coming back from maternity leave.
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. I mean, this is where you can think, I really hope it is direct discrimination, because if they've got a policy of just downgrading women when they return from leave, then we're in real trouble. Yeah, as I kind of said earlier on in the first session, there is a commonality of experience for some women, particularly in white-collar occupations, where you come back from pregnancy, maternity leave, and you find out that actually somebody else is doing your job. You didn't get any training, so you find that you have been significantly disadvantaged. The example is a woman called Pauline Rogers in Glasgow. She was working in a care provider. She told her boss that she was pregnant and she was going to be needing to take some time off. He immediately cut her hours. It's like, okay, that's not helping anything. So yeah. Very much, that's direct. It's a matter of choice. It's not a matter of policy. The gay man who's been sacked for complaining about persistent homophobic banter, I put in inverted commas. Who's going to pick that one up?
Yeah, that's me. So I would say that's direct, because even though it might say banter, it's really not for that other person, and I would say it could be almost like bullying. Obviously their complaint to management wasn't treated seriously. Instead of maybe investigating and mediating, that person was sacked, so I don't think they were taken very seriously, and they're obviously worse off than their colleagues. So that's why I thought that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much direct. Although I think it's interesting because it might feel almost like it's a practice. That it's tolerated by management. They see it happening. They might even lead it themselves. And when you complain about it, it's just, it's just, a bit of banter, a bit of a laugh. And it's like, well, no, it's always about me that gets this. So no, again, this was this case was in a advertising agency in Glasgow. The guy involved, yeah, he was sacked. He just thought, well, I can't, he ended up going to tribunal. And he got about £44,000. And this one, I think, Pauline Rogers, which was the pregnancy maternity one, she went to tribunal. Again, it was about £38,000. It's not the biggest disincentive for a company, but it's not a good sign either at all. So the railway station that doesn't have step-free access, who's picking that one up?
That would be myself. And I think that would be indirect discrimination. And it would mainly be targeting people with a disability. because it would preventing them from doing something that a person without a disability could possibly do.
Yeah, very much. I mean, it is indirect discrimination, absolutely. It's not just disabled people. I think is an interesting one. This because as we know,
yeah, because I was going to say people with frames and older people, and then I thought, oh, I'm just going to talk for too long.
No, you're absolutely right. And you think, it's 2020. 50% of Scotland's railway stations are inaccessible to wheelchair users. They're inaccessible to wheelchair users. They're going to be pretty difficult for people with prams and pretty difficult for some older people as well. The Glasgow Light Railway, which is one of the biggest public transit things in Scotland. Again, 50% of the stations are inaccessible. Now, some people would say, well, look, we built all of this stuff 100 years ago. Aberdeen railway station, it's built 100 years ago. We can't expect it to be, well, we've renovated it quite a few times in the 100 years since it's been built. And it's a major blockage. It prevents disabled people, particularly, from getting to and from work, prevents disabled people from mixing socially, from civically, politically, economically. So there is a programme of renovating Scotland's railway stations, but it is taking forever and ever. So it's about how sometimes you can physically design things which exclude people. Okay, second last one here. We've got a drinks company that's advertising for a youthful promo girl.
Yes, I think we've all seen those advertisements for drinks with the young, beautiful woman drinking a beer somewhere. I think that is indirect discrimination, and I don't think it's aimed at anyone directly, but I think it subscribes to gender and age stereotypes. And I think these stereotypes can be quite harmful. And these types of ads can contribute to inequality in society.
That's an interesting. I mean, direct or indirect. I would tend to say myself that's direct, because they're kind of saying we know we do not want somebody like me, for example, an older man, to apply for this job. I mean, we all know what they mean by this. We all know what they're trying to do. It was actually quite good when we got this in at the commission. It was like, wait, this is three forms of discrimination: age discrimination, youthful, gender discrimination, girl, and it's a discriminatory advert. So, yay! We did contact them and they kind of went, oh, okay, we can't do that. I think it's one of these interesting examples where actually they probably will go on and discriminate because they know what they want, they know what they're doing, but they just can't advertise it. I think it's, it's where sometimes the law is a little bit more, isn't that sophisticated sometimes as the ways around it. Okay, Julie, you're up last. But not least, so the supermarket, which requires all staff to work at least 2 Saturdays a month.
Yes, I think this is indirect, just by the wording as well. It requires all staff to work, so it's a kind of policy thing. However, it could impact on people with families, children, women, that type of.
See, that's an interesting one, Julie, because the actual cases were around religion. You're right, it is indirect discrimination. It's a blanket rule which applies to everybody. Presumably the supermarket put it in terms of fairness, that everybody has to work the weekend, blah, blah, blah. In this case, directly, it's Jewish people, or indirectly, it's Jewish people for reasons would not. We've also seen cases about Fridays from Muslim communities, and we've seen cases about Sunday working from particularly evangelical Christians, arguing that disproportionately this is going to prevent me from working. I cannot comply with this instruction. But you are absolutely right, I think, as well, that if you have childcare responsibilities or other caring responsibilities where there is no other provision at the weekend, a school or a respite, I think there's a very strong arguable case. And I think the thing which, when these cases have gone to court, the thing is, well, look, this is a big high street supermarket that employs maybe 150 people. Do you really have no capacity to fill the Saturdays without putting pressure on people who've got religious, family or social obligations? So again, it's just that inflexibility, that lack of, paying attention to the people that who work for you, not just the employee numbers. Brilliant. You got all of those right. Give yourselves huge rounds of applause. And this is really the concept that we want to take into the last session, which I'll be coming to in a minute, where we go on to start to look at what the potential impact of these policies are on equality. So I will just go back onto the slides again. Hold on, bear with me. Here we go. From the current slide, right, okay. So, as I said, the basis of the Equality Act is around non-discrimination, and it's retroactive, so it only take action when you've been discriminated against. Recognising that this was limited, successive governments have brought in public sector equality duties, which apply to the public sector particularly. Which aim to put a greater responsibility on the public sector to do things right, because of the public funding and the important role that they play in provision of public services. So this is the public sector equality duty. It applies across all 9 protected characteristics, so that's age, sex, gender, blah blah, and it has 3 components, and this is the lens that you will be using to look at your investment programs and the projects you're developing under the City Region deal. So, the elimination of unlawful discrimination, the advancement of equality of opportunity, and the fostering of good community relations. Now, unpacking these, the elimination of unlawful discrimination is essentially not setting up or perpetuating policies or practices which are discriminatory. So we've already had examples of those. So particularly unlawful policies around hiring or the conditions of employment, things like that. The advancement of equality of opportunity is about recognizing, as we've seen from the slides in the first section of this training, that the world is not equal and that there are some groups who have less opportunity than others, and that's often defined through a protected characteristic. So what is it that we can do as a public body to create more of that level playing field that we seem to be talking about so much? And then lastly, the fostering of good community relations. That's about not setting people against each other, making people feel or disadvantaged or disadvantaged in a way which may start to create community tensions. And we tend to see this most perhaps around race, unfortunately, also in Scotland, particularly around religion. So it's about public authorities having to think through what it is that they do. You can almost kind of simplify this right down to kind of 3 things. Are we doing bad things? What is the opportunity to do good things? And how do we not stop this setting people against each other? So in the last part of the training, I'm going to come on to very shortly, I will be talking about this a lot. So this is the specific duty about impact assessment. This is what the law requires you to do. So any new proposed, revised policy or practice needs to be run against the general equality duty. That's the eliminate, advance, foster duty. You need to take into account relevant evidence about people with protected characteristics. You need to integrate that into the policy development process. So if you identify discrimination or you identify a means of promoting or advancing equality of opportunity, that's highlighted. When you've done it, needs to be public domain, accountability and transparency. And then critically, lastly, there needs to be a review function. If you are going to set up a new policy about access to public housing, you need to monitor it by ethnicity or gender or disability and be able to see 2-3 years down the line, is it working? Are we achieving the aims that we wanted to do? Now, just lastly in this section, I'm going to touch on the legislation about socioeconomic disadvantage. The duty here is slightly different. And as you'll see, it refers to strategic decisions. So that's big decisions, which might be about economic development or transport, about policing in an area. So big strategic decisions, not individual decisions. And how can we organize these policies or practices or investments in a way which reduces inequalities of outcome, which are caused by socioeconomic disadvantage. And I'm going to touch on all of these three concepts as we go into the last session, which is going to be about an equality impact assessment in practice. So I'm just going to pause there for a minute. Any thoughts, questions, and we'll do the record thing.